Welcome back to the autumn of 1957. If we were all shook up, it's because we'd begun to realize that the relative peace and prosperity we'd enjoyed since World War II, combined with a national belief in happy endings, still had not turned America into Sunnybrook Farm. Governors would not do as they were told. The young would not mind their elders. After all, they were beginning to outnumber them. Even music seemed to have gone haywire. And if America was the greatest place on earth, then why wasn't everybody happy? Luckily for us, there still were a few things you could count on, take pride in.
We had prided ourselves on our scientific and technological know-how. Maybe we never had a Mozart or a Picasso, but by golly, we had Edison and Henry Ford. Now that complacency was shaken when the Soviets launched Sputnik. It was about twice the size of this model and weighed 184 pounds. Its political and psychological weight was incalculable. As for the heirs of Henry Ford, well, they had a bad year.
Whoa, you thrill me. I know you thrill me.
Our obsession with progress seemed unshakable. Take cars. Nobody questioned why next year's models had to come out in September or why their debut was such a big deal. New cars were progress. The past was used Kleenex. Detroit was not in the Kleenex business.
Starting with a radical new concept, the aeroframe chassis, Pontiac now brings you new stability never known in a car before.
Here's the busiest car in the world, our 58 Oldsmobile Fiesta.
If new cars were progress, so were suburbs. Both were growing, and each depended on the other. Ford meant to keep those customers satisfied, so it researched and developed for 3 years, then in September, presented us with the automobile's first test tube baby.
It is the car we designed around you.
It was the classic calculated risk, a product of market research in every way except for its name. Gail Warnock, in charge of public relations, remembers what happened.
And Mr. Breach, who was the chairman of the board, called a meeting of his executive committee to name the car.
The last of many such meetings. In all, there would be 6,000 suggestions. Ford even went to the poet Marion Moore, probably the only spontaneous action connected with this car. She thought Utopian Turtle Top might do.
So finally, Breach says, I don't like any of them. Why don't we call it Edsel?
Up to now, we at Ford have called it simply the E-Car. Today, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to announce its official name, Edsel, in honor of my father, who served as president of Ford Motor Company.
Now, Edsel was the first name to drop out of every survey. Nobody liked it. You ask them to associate it with something, and they'd say Schmetzel, Diesel, Pretzel.
How does it feel to own an Edsel?
It's like falling in love.
Raymond Perry was among those who fell in love too easily that fall.
The lines of the car and the fact that it had so much advanced electronic equipment that it really struck me as something that I had to have. It had a lot of the modern advances with electronics. In fact, on the steering wheel, they had a push-button operation that shifted the gears. And I liked the taillights on the car especially well. They were like two eyebrows. These were real graceful.
To an Edsel dealer, Perry was Mr. Right.
If they could sell an Edsel to a Cadillac owner, that would be quite a feather in their cap. The Edsel Citation convertible was an even trade for the Cadillac that I owned.
Promises, promises. It was promises that lured 2.5 million people into the tent the first weekend, one of the biggest ad campaigns ever for a car.
This is the Edsel.
Or an Oldsmobile sucking a lemon. Finally, the Edsel proved Thurber was correct when he wrote that progress was all right, but it went on too long.
The fruit of American automotive technology that fall was a lemon. How embarrassing. There was worse embarrassment to come. In the fall of '57, the International Geophysical Year was just hitting its stride. That was a massive, cooperative, scientific effort involving 67 countries. We all learned a lot about the weather, and cosmic rays, and sunspots, and all that. We also learned that on October 4th, the Soviet Union had launched a little round metal ball, less than 2 feet in diameter, into orbit around the Earth. This is a simulation courtesy of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. While the Soviets were conquering space, this country was making Edsels, incongruous, embarrassing, but it woke us up.
This first satellite was today successfully launched in the USSR.
Sputnik orbited the Earth every 96 minutes at a speed of 18,000 miles an hour, beeping radio signals to Earth. News of Sputnik's launching reached New York Times science reporter Walter Sullivan at a Soviet embassy party for the International Geophysical Year. He got a call from his office.
I went down into the lobby and picked up the phone, and they said very excitedly, "We've just gotten a bulletin from Moscow, and the Russians have launched the first Earth satellite." So I went back up into the embassy ballroom. Now, mind you, this is the Soviet embassy on 16th Street then, a grand old mansion with a fabulously grand ballroom, chandeliers and all that sort of thing, and all these people standing around drinking vodka, eating caviar, celebrating this conference. And I realized that nobody in that room could know, not even the Russians, that they had launched this satellite. They knew they were going to try, but they couldn't know that they had succeeded. So I thought, let's announce it to the Russians in their own embassy.
White House Staff Secretary General Andrew Goodpaster brought the tidings to his commander-in-chief.
I took it in to the president, who was rather unconcerned, and his comment and the comments of others in the White House that first day were rather more than low-key. They just indicated that this was not a matter of tremendous significance.
John Eisenhower thought his father goofed.
Now, Dad's mistake was, or his error, I think you'd agree with me, was not in knowing what the Soviets could do, but in the public reaction. He very vastly underestimated the panic that hit the country as a result of the Soviets putting up the satellite.
Russia had won the opening round in rocket supremacy.
Panic may be an overstatement, but certainly this country was concerned, even shaken. Ham radio operators became local celebrities. Arthur Bonte was a New York ham.
I have logged it 4 distinct times. The first time being yesterday evening about 6:35 p.m. It started to come in.
My son had put a sign up outside the house asking for a penny to listen to the Sputnik, and of course all the kids in the neighborhood wanted to hear the Sputnik.
Around the world I've searched for you.
At Britain's Jodrell Bank Observatory, Sir Bernard Lovell monitored Sputnik and marveled.
I thought this must be one of the most wonderful places on Earth, but it wasn't. The most wonderful place on Earth at that moment was in the Soviet Union, where Sputnik was being launched.
Rock and roll star Little Richard, who was in Australia, had an expensive, visceral reaction to Sputnik.
And I said, boy, this is something new. Russia done sent Sputnik up. I better get out of here, because I really believe that something serious was getting ready to happen to the world. That's after these dates, I'm going to stop singing. I'm going with the Lord. And so I got on the ferry, and I threw all of my jewelry in the water. I don't know where the fish is right now, but he's full of diamonds. He's a shining fish.
Sir Anthony Nutting, a former high-ranking official in the British Foreign Ministry, was working temporarily as a journalist.
I remember one newspaper ran the devastating statement in its editorial: while we have been conquering Little Rock, the Russians have been conquering space.
Soviet supremacy in space generated fear as well as embarrassment.
It showed us that the Soviets could use a missile to land a weapon on the United States from Soviet territory, just that. And at that time, it would not have been possible for the United States to have replied.
Arkady Shevchenko was a Soviet diplomat.
First Sputnik was an indication that the Soviet Union become an equal partner and adversary of the United States in the world, everywhere.
The Soviet Union and the United States had planned to orbit an Earth satellite as part of the International Geophysical Year. But in this country, civilians in charge of the satellite part collided with the military in charge of the rocketry part. In that bureaucratic bog, Sputnik buried an American illusion.
We always believed that Americans were tops in things. So we had that feeling. We were instilled as kids that, hey, you're an American, you could do it better, you know. Of course, it was a little bit of a shock to find out somebody else could do it, too.
Senator Stiles Bridges of New Hampshire made that reaction official. For the Congressional Record, he wrote, "The time has clearly come to be less concerned with the depth of the pile on the new broadloom rug or the height of the tail fin on the new car, and to be more prepared to shed blood, sweat, and tears."
Come back to the autumn of 1957. Bring your library card. For a clue to the times, look in the card catalog under the letter B, as in businessmen, beats, and the bomb. Books are the original time machines.
Some ski vacations. My 3 kids have 3 different colds. Anne's coughing, Johnny's stuffy, and poor little Bobby has coughing, sneezing, and a stuffy head.
Different kids can get different colds. That's why there's Pediacare with 3 different formulas. For coughs, there's Pediacare 1. For a stuffy runny nose, 2. For colds with all those symptoms, 3.
Pediacare worked on all their colds.
Oh, Mom! Pediacare, because different kids get different colds.
Glad Cling Wrap. When we say cling, we mean it.
Le Jardin.
They say romance is back in style. I say it never went out. Le Jardin says it too.
Le Jardin de Max Factor, the incurably romantic fragrance. So exceptionally smooth. The night belongs to Michelob.
Sunday. The mystery of the deep,
We found assassin! We found the gold!
but someone has to pay. Brooke Shields, Burgess Meredith, Trouble in Paradise, Wet Goes.
Sunday.
I recall that after Sputnik, those of us who were in secondary school were encouraged to put Shakespeare on the back burner and start paying attention in math class. America needed rocket scientists, and rocket scientists didn't need Shakespeare, or so they said. Being mathematically impaired from birth, I was excused from the space race and permitted to continue wasting my time reading books that didn't have answers in the back. I had company. 3 of the best-selling books in the fall of 1957 said something about the way we were that fact often does not. What follows are 3 readings from 3 of those books, courtesy of 3 distinguished actors. What follows is not about answers, it's about questions.
The first book was a nonfiction bestseller that fall. William H. White took a critical but not unfriendly look at a new breed that was now numerically dominant in this country, the white-collar worker. In the fall of '57, there were 1.5 million more people selling the sizzle than there were making the steak. The new man lived in the suburbs, surrounded by the appliances of the good life, earned about $6,000 a year in a middle management job, and he wanted to stay put. Author White gave him a book and gave him a name. Actor Tony Roberts gives us a sample.
This book is about the organization man. If the term is vague, it is because I can think of no other way to describe the people I'm talking about. They talk of the treadmill, the rat race, of the inability to control one's direction, but they have no sense of plight. Frequently, they talk of finding a sort of plateau, a position well enough up to be interesting, but not so far up as to have one's neck outstretched for others to chop at. As far as social values are concerned, suburbia is the ultimate expression of the interchangeability so sought by organization. It is classless, or at least its people want it to be. The organization man has found in the new suburbs an ideal way station. He is the one most quick to move out, but as soon as he does, another replaces him, and then another. It is he who sets the tone. And if he is as uncertain as any in keeping up with the Joneses, it is because he is the Joneses. One of the hazards of the kind of life we lead, says a man now poised on the threshold of top management, is the loss of well-defined objectives. What is the purpose? What is the end? I was deeply a part of the community. I was contributing and was effective. Then they asked me to come to New York. The VP in charge told me that by coming here, I'd have a box seat in the big time. If his guess has been bad, it's a terrible waste. I hope the company isn't playing checkers with me. I feel a lack.
While all those organization men settled into harness, a much smaller group kicked over the traces. They were the Beats. They renounced everything the organization man stood for. They embraced poetry and jazz. They made a religion of nonconformity. Their high priest was Jack Kerouac, and their Bible was his new book that fall, On the Road.
I had traveled 8,000 miles around the American continent, and I was back on Times Square, and right in the middle of a rush hour, too. Seeing with my innocent road eyes the absolute madness and fantastic career of New York with its millions and millions hustling forever for a buck among themselves. A mad dream, grabbing, taking, giving, sighing, dying, just so they could be buried in those awful cemetery cities beyond Long Island City. The high towers of the land, the other end of the land, the place where paper America is born. The only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time, the ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, burn, burn like fabulous yellow Roman candles exploding like spiders across the stars, and in the middle you see the blue center light pop, and everybody goes, "Oh."
And pop goes the A-bomb. If the launch of Sputnik shocked us all in the fall of '57, continued atomic testing scared us. That fear of nuclear war was reflected that fall in a third book, a best-selling novel. In it, radiation clouds approach the last innocent victims of Armageddon. On the Beach by Neville Shute.
I won't take it, she said vehemently. It's not fair. No one in the southern hemisphere ever dropped a bomb, a hydrogen bomb or a cobalt bomb or any other sort of bomb. We had nothing to do with it. Why should we have to die because other countries 9 or 10,000 miles away from us wanted to have a war? So bloody unfair. It's that all right, he said. And that's the way it is. There was a pause. And then she said angrily, "It's not that I'm afraid of dying, Dwight. We've all got to do that sometime. It's all the things I'm going to have to miss." She turned to him in the starlight. "I'm never going to get outside Australia. All my life I've wanted to see the Rue de Rivoli. I suppose it's the romantic name. It's silly because I suppose it's just a street like any other street. But that's what I've wanted. And I'm never going to see it. Because there isn't any Paris now, or London, or New York." He smiled at her gently. "The Rue de Rivoli may still be there with things in the shop windows and everything. I wouldn't know if Paris got a bomb or not. Maybe it's all there still, just as it was. With the sun shining down the street the way you'd want to see it. That's the way I like to think about that sort of place. It's just that folks don't live there anymore." She got restlessly to her feet. "It's not the way I wanted to see it. A city of dead people."
Whether by fool's luck or wise design, we have avoided the apocalypse. Maybe On the Beach had a little something to do with that. Come back to the autumn of 1957 and some legacies of that season.
just the two of us.
That great dentine taste makes it nicer to be together, because not even mouthwash can freshen your breath better than when you're chewing dentine.
Just the two of us, you and I.
If you're allergy sensitive, cold symptoms can make your winter attacks feel even worse. For relief, discover Benadryl Decongestant. With Benadryl, the most prescribed allergy medication ever, plus a nasal decongestant. Benadryl Decongestant.
Their shapes have been restyled, their controls redesigned. But there's one thing about Mustang that will never change. The sheer thrill of driving one. The new Mustang convertible, LX, and GT. What they have in common is anything but. This is Mustang.
Have you driven a Ford lately?
Inside the Washington scandal, secret moves, secret men. Now the story is becoming clear, and ABC News will tell it. Tonight on a special edition of 2020 with Ted Koppel.
To shake some sense into, I wonder, is the phrase an Americanism? I'm going to shake some sense into your head. But just how much shaking does it take to produce sense? And what do you get if you shake too hard? Our premise tonight was that America, in the fall of 1957, was all shook up. That being the case, did it shake some sense into us, or what?
By November, the 101st Airborne was withdrawn, but the State National Guard was federalized and remained until spring. And in September of '58, Governor Faubus tried another ploy.
I have ordered closed the senior high schools of Little Rock.
The schools were closed for a year, reopened in 1959. Central High was integrated. Faubus flourished. He was re-elected 5 more times. His intransigence gave heart to segregationists throughout the South. Federal force was called upon repeatedly to protect the civil rights and the safety of blacks. Central High School has been integrated, peaceful, and proud for years now. 58% black, 60% of its graduates going on to college. Faubus is a footnote.
In September of 1957, nobody could have imagined that in December of 1986, American Bandstand would still be on the air, and with Madison Avenue close on its heels.
I got my 501 blue.
The spare change of the 5017 multiplied and multiplied until in 1986, teenagers spent nearly $30 billion. Spent, not earned.
You never saw a car like the 58 Edsel.
The Edsel cost the Ford Motor Company about $400 million. It survived for 2 years, then died unmourned and unloved. Only its name lives on. The funny-sounding name for a funny-looking car, still a synonym for failure. Cars, like politicians, can endure almost anything but ridicule.
Sputnik went up in October. Then a second Soviet satellite, this one carrying a dog, went up in November, and the red flag went up in America. This is what the president said.
One of our greatest and most glaring deficiencies is the failure of us in this country to give high priority enough to scientific education and to the place of science in our national life.
In December, we launched our first satellite. It blew up on the pad. But by 1958, we'd learned. Explorer 1 was the beginning. Now the sky is filled with weather, telephone, television, and spy satellites, with more to come. In fact, there are so many satellites up there that it's almost impossible to photograph the night sky and get a picture that does not include at least one satellite trail. Sputnik changed American education, too. Congress increased federal aid to science and education, and, well, one thing led to another.
Right here?
Well, there it is, the way it was for a couple of months in the autumn of 1957. The institution most shaken by the events of that season was the Little Red Schoolhouse, the educational establishment. After Sputnik, the cry of back to basics was heard in the land. More physics, more math, more facts. Well, they were certainly more important than basket weaving and driver's ed. But were they more important than the arts, the humanities, the social sciences? That debate continues to this day. In the South, black students simply wanted the best education they were entitled to, whether it was calculus or glee club. And in Little Rock, 9 brave children shook the tree until the fruit fell.
The 23rd edition of Webster's Dictionary calls Edsel a popular synonym for loser. The dictionary, like most of us, has missed the point. The Edsel wasn't a loser, it was a prototype. The first car designed and built by advertising, bookkeeping, and market research. Not to run well, but to sell well. It did neither. Sadly, it also didn't discourage the market researchers and bookkeepers. To them, the Edsel was a practice run, and with enough practice, they seemed damn near to have perfected the trick of making profit the real product. In 1986, a great number of American companies are no longer in business to produce cars or TV sets or soap or movies or soft drinks. They produce profit, which accounts for some of the cars, TV sets, soap, movies, and soft drinks. These days, if it sells, it's good, not the other way around. And if you still believe Edsel is a synonym for loser, check the 1986 price of a 1957 Edsel. Then ask for a refund on your Webster's Dictionary. And so it goes.
These things also happened in the fall of 1957.
The Milwaukee Braves won the World Series, beating the Yankees in 7 games.
Francis Cardinal Spellman was appointed as the first military vicar of the United States.
In Nevada, the Atomic Energy Commission detonated the first recorded underground nuclear explosion.
In Haiti, Papa Doc, Francois Duvalier, was re-elected president.
Dag Hammarskjöld was unanimously re-elected as Secretary General of the United Nations General Assembly.
James Hoffa, under indictment for perjury, was elected president of the Teamsters Union.
Sophia Loren and Carlo Ponti were married by proxy. Bing Crosby and Catherine Grant were married in person.
Louis B. Mayer, Christian Dior, and Harry Teets, the warden of San Quentin Prison, died.
On September 18th, Robin Horlick, our world production assistant, was born.
Associate producer Jody Abramson was born on September 12th. For the Our World Study Guide, write to Community Relations, ABC, 1330 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10019.
For a transcript of this broadcast, send $3 to Our World Transcripts, 2 John Street, New York, New York, 10038.
Howard. He's beaten the odds in battle back from injury. Olympic gold medalist Pernell Whitaker challenges former champ Alfredo Lane live. Performance. World champion Debbie Thomas leads a holiday celebration America on Ice on ABC's Wide World of Sports, Saturday.
An ABC News business brief. Now from New York, Dan Cordtz.
Good evening. AT&T will eliminate 27,000 jobs next year and write off $3.2 billion. More than 10,000 IBM employees will take early retirement in the first half of 1987, and Gillette will reduce its workforce by 2,400 over the next 3 months. Americans boosted their spending 1.1% in November, even though personal income rose only 0.3%. And the government predicts business will increase investment just 0.2% next year. The nation's money supply fell last week.